I think the climate debate is losing at the moment. You know, if you look at a newspaper, you're on the losing team if you are talking constantly about the problem of climate change. But what we actually need to do is invite a few more winners into the space.
Doing a bit of digging around, Sebastian Vettel, the F1 driver, was one person, polar explorers, activists, politicians, bankers. Why do you invite such a wide range?
What we're trying to do is inspire a room. And actually you need these unlikely candidates to actually break open that, you know, the climate movement is a clique, a complete clique, and they love it for being that. And I think what we're saying is, if you really want to make a difference to the world, you've got to bring people with you. And so when I say the world doesn't need another climate event, and you rightly point out that we originated as a climate event, we definitely came at it from a non-climate space. Why doesn't an event exist with the ambition of Web Summit for the real world until we invented Blue Earth Summit? Every year we've run it, it's doubled, if not tripled in size. So we're 5,000 people per day now, and so we probably will end up with over 15,000 individuals that come through the doors of Blue Earth Summit next month. There's nothing worse than meeting someone from the climate space that's judging you at hello whilst telling you how many years they worked in climate and have you read their latest book, because it doesn't bring people with you. And that, I think, to the start of your point, was why is the climate movement broken? It's because
Just one quick thing before we get into the episode. This podcast is brought to you by Ecology, the UK's most trusted climate action platform. They help businesses to reduce their emissions, restore our planet, and report their progress for every step of their climate journey. If you'd like to learn more, check them out with the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. Hello, Will. Thank you very much for coming on the Climate Unfucked podcast. I want to get straight in and ask, why do you think the climate crisis is a broken record?
Oh, hello, Rob, and thank you for having me on. And to get straight to it, the climate movement is a broken record. It's a bit of a harsh thing to say, but I think there's truth in it, because I think it's the same people saying the same things to the same audience. And I think there needs to be a wider understanding of the world around us, the things that people have got going on. So typically, climate people like talking to climate people at climate events. And I certainly have been to enough of those to decide that Blue Earth and what we do doesn't want to be another one of those. Because you do need to widen the net. And I also think to answer that question more straightly, why is it a broken record? Because I also think it's out of ideas. You know, the record should keep turning, and that awareness should keep going until the problem is solved. I feel like it's a record worth spinning, but it's broken if you continually talk about a problem without coming up with a solution. I think, and that is why I would describe it as that.
So you said we don't need more events, but you run Blue Earth. Could you give people a kind of overview as to what Blue Earth is and why it's not an event?
Well, yeah, I definitely, you know, we've been running Blue Earth for over 5 years now. We invented it in our minds off the back of seeing what innovation events were all about. And we were actually the Web Summit in Lisbon with the founders of Web Summit. That's 80,000 people describing themselves as sort of Glastonbury for geeks, I think was on their website. But it was kind of where the future goes to be born. It was the sort of dot-com boom. It's where Uber got their first investment, and it just the level of ambition, motivation, and excitement. And I was just in there, the founder said, why doesn't an event like this exist for the real world? This is for the digital world. And he said, I don't know, let's talk about it. So we ended up going back to Dublin and spending 2 weeks in his offices working out what does an event look like that brings people together in a more meaningful way, that's a bit more purposeful. You know, what can be a more meaningful event than finding solutions to transform the way the world works, you know, find solutions to some of the world's most systemic problems. And that was all going well until COVID hit, and suddenly he had 80,000 people not in Lisbon and we had a bit of time on our hand. And so we spent time working ourselves out. And so when I say the world doesn't need another climate event, and you rightly point out that we originated as a climate event, we definitely came at it from a non-climate space. Now, I'm not an activist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an academic. I'm an entrepreneur. And I think what entrepreneurs do is solve problems. And I think what the climate space do a very good job at and need to continue to do is point out problems. And so I felt that there was a gap there to say, why doesn't an event exist with the ambition of Web Summit for the real world? And so we invented Blue Earth Summit.
What is it?
Well, we are a range of different things. We're an always on platform. And when I say always on, it ends up by connecting ideas with investment. But our main summit, which is happening in October, so in 5 weeks' time, our main summit is about reconnecting the working world. So it's a B2B event. It's for people using their time in work as a force for good. I think that also was a time during that sort of lockdown period where you say, well, what is the point of me? Here's me sitting in my home. I'm trying to work. I'm trying to live life normally. And we have those horrible phrases like new normal. But everyone got a bit reflective on terms of using your time in work as something good, purposeful. And so it's a purpose-driven B2B networking event where deals get done, essentially, because it's really important to focus on the deal side of it. There's so many events that they gather up the same people talking about the same thing, and then they just go home. And actually, they're quite good fun. You're talking to your peers, you're talking to your colleagues, you're sharing ideas, but you're not really tasked with doing anything. Whereas to your point about what is Blue Earth, it's very transactional. So we inspire people, we connect them, and we drive action. And our actions often work, it's easily described as transaction. Like people are investing in businesses, or NGOs are finding fundraising. So we really don't shy away from the transactional element of what Blue Earth is. But the people that are attracted to it come to it because this is where things happen. That's where deals get done. It's not just a meeting of minds. Sometimes it's a meeting of people that disagree. We really do a lot of that in terms of private sector, public sector, and third sector. All agree that there's a problem, but they don't necessarily agree on how to solve it. And so a lot of what Blue Earth does is try and get that level of understanding to, admit that if you work in the third sector, you might not like someone that works in the private sector and runs a corporate bank. In fact, you might be on a campaign to call out the activities of that corporate bank. Yet we're saying without that corporate bank being on our team, which is to find solutions to regenerate our natural world, we don't want to do that without the banks. So we want to do it with the banks. So we just sort of find the common ground. And to answer this even more long-windedly, common ground is those that spend time in the outdoors are naturally inspired to want to protect it. So we started from a media and a marketing and an outdoor and adventure background that says, let's inspire people around being outdoors, being healthy, and living a more sustainable life. Whereas a lot of the climate movements start with, there's a massive problem here. Why the hell is no one listening? And probably with a few swear words thrown in between. We're saying to the entrepreneurial world, there is a massive problem, but hang on a minute. We see that as a huge opportunity to bring new people in, new voices, new ideas that by transforming the way the world works can at the same time be a solution to some of those problems.
Can you give people a kind of gauge as the scale of it, maybe attendees or amount raised? You said about transactions.
Yeah. Every year we've run it, it's doubled, if not tripled in size. So we're 5,000 people per day now. And then when we moved it from Bristol to London, and in Bristol, people used to stay for all 3 days, which was great. But in London, people sort of come and go. And so we probably will end up with over 15,000 individuals that come through the doors of Blue Earth Summit next month. And then on top of that, we run different things. We run forums, and forums are really specific to, I'm a founder looking for investment. And then we invite investors to come and meet those founders. So the scale of it is is still growing. We're not Web Summit yet,
Yet.
but but with the relevance of what we're talking about, the real world, we're actually talking about the real world, and we're also trying to help people understand the way the real world works, because I think it doesn't take me to come on here to tell your listeners or agree with your listeners that the way the world works isn't always the way it should work. And if you have a problem with the way the world works, we are encouraging people to take an entrepreneurial mind or view of that and come up with a solution that is radically better than what is currently going on.
You said you invite some unlikely people, and I'm doing a bit of digging around. Sebastian Vettel, the F1 driver, was one person. Polar
Yeah.
explorers, activists, politicians, bankers. Why do you invite such a wide range?
I think it's really important to say that, finding solutions to regenerate our natural world, that's something that affects everybody way, way beyond the scope of any number, however big we ever manage to get Blue Earth Summit. And actually a lot of what we do is focus on the quality. But then in terms of who are they turning up to listen to, you can listen to any climate activist or any, natural science expert, PhD, prize winning academic. They'll have a TED talk. But what we're trying to do is inspire a room. And actually you need these unlikely candidates to actually break open that, the climate movement is a clique, a complete clique, and they love it for being that. And I think what we're saying is, if you really want to make a difference to the world, you've got to bring people with you. And so a multiple world champion F1 petrol head athlete with millions of followers has finished his career in motorsports and is looking for purpose in his life and looking for what's next. And he is now getting involved in sort of biodiversity projects. He's got a huge amount of money, he's got a huge amount of influence, and he's got a pretty decent habit of winning. And I think that a little bit of Sebastian Vettel's mindset is adds a little bit of freshness to a room that don't know it all. When it comes to perhaps climate science, they do, and they can probably describe to you what the ton of carbon is, but they also don't understand why not everyone is understanding what they're saying. And so we love bringing in person like let's be really candid here. I think the climate debate is losing at the moment. If you look at a newspaper, you're on the losing team if you are talking constantly about the problem of climate change. And I think we can go on to that as much as you like. But what we actually need to do is invite a few more winners into the space, people that are having an impact at a global level. So yeah, so Seb Vettel was a sports person. We also like having adventurers, people that are so determined and so resilient to get their challenge done, whether it's get to the top of the mountain, cross that ocean, swim that stretch of water. We've got Lewis Pugh coming to Blue Earth this year. I've been a huge fan of the way he approaches awareness.
He swam the Hudson, was it?
He swam all the kind of things that you would think would be impossible to swim, whether it's, the cold. Yeah, exactly. The coldest water or the most polluted water. He raises incredible awareness for that at a UN level. And I've always been a fan of that being the way that inspires people, is because it's previously thought that can't be done. And the kind of people that come to Blue Earth with an entrepreneurial mindset, they're drawn to those impossible problems. They go, it's only, I don't know what the phrase is, but I think it was Nelson Mandela, something's impossible till it's done. So, if it wasn't Nelson Mandela, then I got that wrong. But it was someone of his level. Yeah, has said something is only impossible until it's done. And I think the climate crisis, as I don't even like calling it that, but it is. Let's be honest, it's a total crisis, like nature loss, climate change. Even if that's not happening on our front door in London, it is happening elsewhere around the world. It is a huge, huge problem, if not definite crisis. how are we going to fix that crisis? Well, we need to invite everyone needs to be in the room for a start, but also you need those sort of resilient minds that says, oh, I'm not going to quit on that project until it's done. Whether or not energy, I think is absolutely the root cause of our overstepping of planetary boundaries. We've done a hell of a lot of good with energy, but we've also done a hell of a lot of harm with energy, and especially now we've worked out that we're getting it from the wrong places. So to transition into clean and renewable energy is going to take a monumental task. So we love getting adventurers on there that have conquered monumental tasks and have just got that glint and got that inspiration that just says it's impossible till it's done.
It's really inspiring, and I think it's something that I feel like, as you say, the climate movement doesn't have enough of like excitement and better. It has a lot of doom and gloom. I feel it when I read, Carbon Brief or something. If someone's sat there and they're thinking, yes, I want to be leaning more into this narrative, what do you think they need to maybe stop doing, or what do they need to start doing to have that more positive energy that you seem to have about it? Practically,
Well,
maybe.
I think there's sort of horses for courses. You can never have too much information, and it changes. And now we've even worked out ways to sort of deal with too much information, which I think is probably the most transformational tool that we've got within our working lives in the sort of the world of AI. So what I definitely am not saying is that the climate movement need to stop what they're doing. What I am saying is they need to let more people in. So, scientists keep being scientists. If we put a scientist on stage, or when we put a scientist on stage, they're going to talk about science. If you put someone from the land of insurance on stage, they're going to talk about insurance. And if you put an activist on stage, they're going to talk about activism. And I think for some reason, and I don't know why it is the case, but for some reason, the climate movement is very, very quick to shut the door on people. Whether or not, you can get, that horrible phrase that sort of younger people than us use about cancelling people. You can be
Cancel
cancelled.
culture.
Yeah. You can be cancelled from the climate movement straight away.
Have you felt this then,
I haven't.
personally?
I have felt it actually, because when we first started Blue Earth, we were based in Bristol. And we said those that spend time in the outdoors are naturally inspired to want to protect the outdoors. To which point we then got completely bombarded with, well, hang on a minute, that's an elitist phrase, because not everyone can spend time in the outdoors. Oh, and by the way, those that spend time in the outdoors are typically one type of person, and it's not a diverse community. And all of those things are totally true and totally right. But it became that mindset becomes so worthy that you've ended up losing sight of what we were trying to do in the first place, which was find ways to inspire and engage and bring more people into the space. So we're saying if more people spend time in nature, they're more naturally inspired to want to protect it. Now that's more true now than it's ever been. And I look at the sort of the next generation of people coming through, and they're more disconnected with the world around them than they've ever been. And so where does nature even fit into their plans? But I think the climate movement can get over the top in how many problems it's trying to find and how many problems it's simultaneously trying to solve. And in doing so, they narrow the pool of people that they are willing to solve it with. So you take banks as an example. Nearly all banks are involved in some way in fossil fuel exploration, funding, because, and the question that the climate movement have got to ask is, why are they there? Not should they be there, why are they there? That's the question they're not asking. And the reason they're there is because there's a return on investment that exceeds other forms of lending. And so that's just the way the world works. And if there is a job to do, which is to call them out, and I think that's fine. I think that is applaudable. And wouldn't it be nice if banks didn't fund fossil fuels? But the reality of that is that we are, as a global civilization totally addicted to those fossil fuels. So the funding will always be there for those explorations. So that the task actually for the climate movement is to come up with an energy source that the customer wants more than fossil fuels. And the open goal there is to not talk about carbon, it's to talk about cost. And so what we're encouraging our movement of people to get motivated by is that you can't fix every problem at the same time. You know, banks will fund fossil fuel projects for, I don't know,
As long
not
as they're
forever.
profitable for.
Yeah, for as long as there are oil rigs out in the whichever sea. But what we're trying to say is, even without that, why aren't we looking at what comes next? And that is what Blue Earth is absolutely focused on, is what comes next.
I've heard you talk a lot about the word better, and how that's kind of what you're talking about here. You're saying we're focused on the future and not the past, and we're trying to seed optimism instead of pessimism. Like, practically, for someone who's listening to this and they're like, well, maybe I'm guilty of this, but I'm not really sure like how to lean into better. You're very bullish on entrepreneur and entrepreneurialism. Do you think that is that a route for everyone? And how can, if someone isn't like that, if someone's not entrepreneurial, how can they still kind of channel that desire for better without being Steve Jobs?
Yeah, well, I think everyone can associate with such a basic word that is better. Everyone is looking for something better, even if it's a bad day today and a better day tomorrow. And I think there's a real connection around that word, and that is how human civilization has done what it's done over the last tens of thousands of years, is pursuit of something better. And I think that's what makes me an optimist, is that you don't have to be an entrepreneur to look at what's better. If you're a consumer, you're looking for how would you define better as a consumer? It's probably along the lines of faster, cheaper, healthier, cooler, longer lasting. Everyone would probably describe, if it was those sort of categories and judgments of those things, as better. And I think when we talk about the climate space and what Blue Earth is bringing to it is finding a better way. Like, there's got to be, if you look at what the fossil fuel industry has done, it's made 1% of the world hold something like 90% of wealth. It's one. That's it. Is 1% of the world own half the global wealth? Like, that's mental if you think about that. Like, the level of unfairness that's gone on there. And then you think, well, if we're going to come up with something better, why don't we what does better look like there? And to a customer, they're going, well, I'm not in the 1%, I'm in the other 99%, and I'm just an energy. I don't even have agency to change my energy provider, or maybe they're in a rented accommodation, or maybe they don't have any heating at all. But I can say what better looks like to them. It would be low cost or even no cost energy that doesn't cost the earth. And that technology has already been invented. That's solar and wind. And renewable energy is the most amazing thing. Not only because it doesn't have to come out of the ground, it's because in the last 10 years it's dropped in price by 90%.
Phenomenally.
Yeah, no other energy source is dropping in price at that speed, to the point where you get a pretty core group, and a growing group, that see a world where energy is free. And that to me is a transformational mindset. That's transforming the way the world works. Imagine if energy was free. What would you do? What would we be doing with our lives, and how would our lives be different? And I think sometimes when I talk about the climate movement being broken, I think they've stopped thinking about what's next. They're completely and absolutely rightfully busy and tied into what's happening now. It's not what's happening next. Whereas when you go to those sort of innovation conferences, it's what's happening next. And I think that's really where Blue Earth has found its flow and its momentum is what comes next. If we get, and I don't think it's if anymore, I think it's when we get to a low or no cost energy system, that will be as transformational as the difference for, like, we invented cars. If you'd gone to sleep in 1895 and you woke up 25 years later in 1920, like, the world has changed. Like, there's no horses on the road. There are just cars, and now people live in villages outside of cities and they drive further away. And, you think of what the car did, despite just being a faster horse, it literally transformed the entire, society is different as a result of mobility. And I think energy is low cost or no cost energy has got the capacity to do even more transformational change than that.
I'm intrigued practically on inviting people unlikely. You call them unlikely suspects, don't you, or unusual suspects into the conversation. How do you, if you're positioned as, tackling the climate crisis, climate change, and people might feel hesitancy to want to come along because they don't want to, be bashed over their head by something they did 15 years ago, or the fact that they drive a petrol Formula One car. How do you create that inclusiveness, or that, unusual suspect vibe practically? Like, are you saying we're different, or are you saying, when you're inviting a speaker, what are you saying to them, or how are you articulating yourselves to be more inclusive?
So, yeah, well, we have a manifesto that we wrote after sort of the third year of running Blue Earth, and within it doesn't even use the word climate. I don't feel like we're even part of a climate movement anymore. I feel like we are part of an inevitable change that is happening with or without Blue Earth Summit. We're doing is trying to shape it towards a better outcome, where nature, think of the things we're inventing at the moment, in terms of when you talk about low cost energy, but you go straight into AI and robotics, like our ability to do things faster, and at greater scale in a world where we've already outgrown planetary boundaries for human civilization. No wonder you've got the big wigs looking at space, because we're outstaying our welcome here. And I think what Blue Earth has quickly become is to say, well, whilst inventing all these things, let's just define what better looks like. Let's define what sustainability is. And in my time of thinking about nothing other than Blue Earth, my take on sustainability is well-being for everyone forever. Like, that is a sustainable phrase. So we talk about well-being, that if someone isn't well and they're not healthy and they don't have a good level of living, their well-being is low, then they're not interested in anything other than getting to the next day. And yes, they're going to cut down that rainforest to farm that land to feed their family. For everyone, we're looking for equitable solutions. So we talk about sort of who owns energy and where does energy come from, and does it make 1% of the world very rich and everyone else very much sort of in line with that? And then forever, is that resource that we're looking for, is that infinite? And so that's why I go straight into renewables. And something that is powered by the sun is created and then can last. A solar panel, once it's made, just works. It's in sync with the world. And I think that is where we're back to being where we originated as a climate movement. How can solutions that we push back and find funding for work in sync with people and planet? And does it fill the mindset of well-being for everyone forever? And if it does, the walk-on music for that solution is just pumped up, and we're sort of welcoming people to the stage as superheroes, really, and as they are, in the same way that Steve Jobs would walk on, as you mentioned earlier, to his sort of launch of the iPhone. Well, think of the person that finds a way that no one ever has an energy bill ever again. Think of the freedoms. I think we're reaching a third age of humankind in our lifetime, which is human freedom, where we can create a system that works for us rather than a system that we work for. And there's so much more to it than that. And I think if you're interested in that mindset, there's some work. The founders of Rethink X are a think tank that I recommend all of your listeners have a look at. But they've written a book called Stellar, and I knew I'd talk about it on this pod. And he's one of our speakers. It's a chap called James Arbib and Tony Saber. James is in the UK, Tony's in the States, and they are futurists. They have got this mindset, this North Star about what world we could live in. But before they describe the world we could live in, which they call a stellar world, they call out the world that we do live in. And that world is one of extraction and one of taking and one of human input, capital input, and natural resource input. And where basically our extractive economy, it pays and it rewards to outcompete your neighbor. Take that land and farm on it before they do, or cut down that forest and build with it before someone else does. And the system that we have is just all about taking out, and that system is fundamentally what's created a climate emergency, to put that sort of word in there. And unless we are honest about that system, we're not going to change anything. So I really recommend people read that sort of mindset, and that's what transformational thought is. And so why would we be... Sorry, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. What is the system that that James is pushing for? What does he describe?
It's a regenerative one, a fully regenerative one, a stellar world based on renewable energy, where we use the power or the energy from the wind, solar, wind, and battery. These are technologies that already exist. So it's not that fantastic, fantastical, photovoltaic panels, as they're called, solar panels, were invented in the 50s. And why haven't they caught on? And the reason they haven't caught on in a very sort of shorthand way is because it doesn't pay for those the incumbency has stopped it from taking it on. But then you look at what is happening in China, and you can't ignore what's happening in China. They've got cheap labor, they're making things, and they are completely focused on what comes next. So they are becoming a clean energy superpower. And I think when we talk about the way the world works and competitive advantage, which is definitely very akin to a business mindset and a sporting mindset, how am I going to get that competitive advantage? Where am I getting my energy from? That's a major input into the system. And how cheap can I get it? And can I get it forever? And so if we talk about sustainability, I like to put it along the lines of a competitive advantage. How is being sustainable giving you a competitive advantage? And if you take my view on sustainability, well-being, which is health for everyone forever. Like any society that has well-being for everyone forever, it's got a huge competitive. I want to be part of that. And I think what the stellar world that he's talking about is creating that. And it's using technologies, which he calls stellar technologies, that are infinite. They don't require, once they're built, they don't require more. So once a solar panel's built, you don't need to power it. It powers itself. And then when you add in the world of AI, and a typical phrase that I hear from the climate movement is when they talk about AI, they will go, yeah, but what about the cost of energy to run it? And then end. That's why that's not going to work. You're like that's the wrong mindset. That AI is moving at such an incredible rate, you cannot ignore it. I think it's going to have more of a transformative impact on our lives than electricity did. And so you go with it, and you more about what you should be talking about is how do you power it, not if you power it. Like, we are going to be having massive data centers, and how do we power it? Well, hopefully not using 100-year-old fossil fuel power station technology. Hopefully we'll use it with infinite power, because there's going to be infinite data and infinite demand on what AI is. And I think people also get confused of what AI is. AI is a tool to give people more knowledge and more time. And if you talk about human existence, about what's better, like having more knowledge and more time, and that in most people's book is better. And so it's going to take off. Things that would
Yeah.
things that would have otherwise have taken 2 hours are now taking 2 seconds, or things that would have, in the world of business. Think of all the amazing use cases that are happening in business. Your listeners will be using AI. They'll know that. They don't need me to come and say why AI is clever. I'm certainly not
Yeah.
enough but on it, but it's better than what was there before. So funnily enough, it takes on. And I think that the climate movement can definitely paint the picture of a better world. Like a world with, greenery around us is better than a world with none. We know what we're also, what I think is really hopeful, is that we're beginning to understand the value of nature and the value of natural resource in a way that we never did before. And so there's a huge amount to be optimistic about, but I think letting new and interesting people in, unusual suspects into this space is needed and exciting.
So I really like this painting the picture of the stellar world. That's really harshly contrasted with what's going on. For example, the Conservatives saying we want to extract all of the oil and gas out of the North Sea. From a climate person would say, what's that going to do to the climate? But it seems like you might approach it from like a different argument to get to the same outcome. Would you? And what would you say to that?
I think I don't think I could, run Blue Earth and support a phrase like that. So clearly,
no, I don't mean support.
but what I can do is understand it, and I understand it on two fronts. That is a party that has been booted out of power and lost a lot of power to right-wing populism that are saying, and I think the climate movement has been hijacked by the populist right that says, if you want to be uncompetitive, talk about the climate. And I think that, there's a lot of people that have believed that, and there's a lot of populist hype that on social media, it's the wrong narrative has played out there, that net zero makes you uncompetitive or renewable energies are more expensive. So Kemi Badenoch on that one is deciding, right, how do I appeal to people that are right of my party to say that I'm actually they're an incredibly successful party, the Tory party. They have been in power far more than they haven't been in power. They're not very good at being in opposition. They've got not as much experience as other parties of being in opposition. But it's a bit of a desperate move, that. And so it's desperation to say, oh, well, by the way, all the populist right, we're still the party for you, but we're a bit more centre and a bit more trusted in power. But on a bigger picture to that, why would a leader of a government say we're going to drill and use our North Sea assets, even though those assets end up on a global market and actually don't really bring the cost of energy down, but they're good for the economy? And that, when you talk about politics, is the number one. Like, keep the economy moving and stay in power. I think, you look at, I'm perhaps going down too many rabbit holes here, but economy is number one. And so there's an asset in the North Sea, and Kemi Badenoch is saying, along the lines of an extractive system, if we don't take it, someone else will. And therefore, or if we don't take that, well, look what Norway are doing. So we want to maintain our competitive advantage. That plays out to voters because, make Britain great again is kind of the vibe she's going for, and don't lose out to Norway. We're constantly in the media made to feel in the UK that the Nordics are doing it brilliantly. Aren't Norway great? And you should see how they're doing it in Sweden and all that kind of stuff. We're always made to feel that it's better over there. So it's competitive advantage. And I think in a extractive world that we live in, it makes absolute sense that short-term government, which how many years does a prime minister or a government have? At the moment, like 3, 4 months, years, I don't know. But the reality is they're not thinking 30 years down the line. They're not thinking 2050. And so they're thinking competitive advantage that put economy first. But what the climate movement need to do on that is go, okay, I understand that. That will always be in our lifetime the way that government is run. Therefore, how do we make renewable energy competitive? That's the
Sexy.
lobbying. And yeah. And it's to a consumer, just make it cheaper. The average consumer doesn't care if they have a gas boiler or a solar or a heat pump, or they just want it cheaper. They just want their house to be warm. And you look at the majority of people and they have that dilemma. You talk about the poverty line of people that spend a certain amount of their income on either heating or eating. And that it's a scary figure, and I haven't got it in front of me, but how much of a priority the cost of food and the cost of energy are. So renewable energy has already done that and is continuing to do it. The cost is going down. Now, what needs to happen there is government needs to find ways to make money from it, because the only reason that we're talking about North Sea oil reserves is because it's a taxable asset. No one lost power by taxing fossil fuel companies more. I don't think. I think generally the majority of people are quite open to taxing huge profits that come off fossil fuels. But I think what the climate movement have got to do is go, how do we make renewable a viable alternative? And that's the kind of debate and context that a lot of our workshops and a lot of our movement is tasked with finding solutions for.
It's interesting to give context to this, that you're having Greg Jackson, the CEO of Octopus, one of the UK's, if not the UK's largest renewable energy provider, come along to Blue Earth in 5 weeks. Why? What do you think do you see people like him taking that stance of, we need to talk about it as better, not just a virtue? And are people doing it enough, people like him?
Yeah, 100%. Well, he built he is a startup, and we talk about Blue Earth being like the proving ground for startups and what comes next. Like he is now the biggest energy supplier, but he has come up with some pretty basic terms that have enabled Octopus Energy to take the market, and it's affordable energy and good customer service. He's not talking about, and it's renewable, but it's affordable, so it's renewable. Like he's not saying I'm going to save the world. He says I'm going to invent a better solution for people to buy energy. And so whether he actually comes from tech, you go into the Octopus Energy offices and it's a tech. It feels like you're in a tech company, and the customer service is so front and center of it, so that you feel like you can have control of your energy. And you think a lot about that. Well, I do a lot about the right-wing narratives that play out within the populist social media world. Take back control. We've voted for some pretty crazy things with that phrase. It is my opinion, and I think that most people that voted for it would probably agree that it probably wasn't a good thing. They had a little moment with COVID where it suddenly felt like it was a good idea, but generally speaking, it's not been the best solution in hindsight. So, but the phrase "take back control" one, and if you look at that, and I don't think most people that come to Blue Earth Summit would have admit to voting for taking back control, but all of them, if they put their
Brexit.
If they put their customer in the context of energy, Imagine taking back control of energy, where you've on the app, you're turning down your heating, where you're charging your car if you have an EV at a time when the energy prices are low, or you're turning on your dishwasher, you're turning on your tumble dryer at night. This is just using clever use of tech to take back control of your energy. And I think there's so many narratives within the right that the climate movement need to open their minds to and go, what do people vote for and what do people want? And they don't dream in carbon, but they do worry about cost. And
Yeah.
entrepreneurs understand that. And if you are inventing stuff that is cheaper, easier to use, and cooler, which is essentially Octopus Energy, funnily enough, it's become the market leader. Um,
Yeah.
and that is exciting. And that's why I'm optimistic around finding solutions to problems.
It's interesting context that you study politics at uni. How does what you learned through that and the worldview of that help you now? Because it sounds like you look at things from quite a kind of, what does mankind fundamentally want,
Yeah.
like on a base level, rather than what do we want to signal? How does it
Yeah.
help
Yeah.
you now?
So I did, politics, which is, I think is a really good foundational degree around, if you're interested in people, which essentially I am. I find human beings out of all animals, despite other people in our, last week I will come to your question, but last week we had a live cam in our office about these birds giving birth, and most of our team were absolutely fascinated. In fact, the level of output in our office went down because these birds just wouldn't freaking give birth, or the eggs wouldn't hatch. But the point is I was like, what? And then it made me think, what I'm actually interested in is people and human interaction and human motivation. And
You were
that's why
watching. You were
I
watching them watching the birds.
I don't know. I was almost feeling guilty about how interested I wasn't actually.
Oh,
The reality is where I am interested is human beings. And when you do a politics degree, I think, well, the one I did, they talk about the foundational level, because I didn't do it at A level or anything like that. I just decided that was something I wanted to spend 3 years finishing my education doing, which is just studying people and politics. And it's all about, what does a world look like? We talked about what does a world look like with no energy, but what does a world look like with no laws, where you can just do whatever the hell you want? Why do we even need laws? Why do we have all these organizations? You know, you, and I find that so interesting in terms of what is human motivation. But when you actually boil it down, is most people get up in the morning to have a better day than the one they had before. That we as a human race have got that sort of DNA. We're
it's in
constantly,
our
yeah,
genes.
yeah, we're constantly looking for something better, and that is what makes me probably an optimist. But then the realist of me says that you look at human behavior, and we're very competitive. And you look at some of the stuff that's going on in the world at the moment, and it's just like, God, we're an awful lot. Like, we're an awful bunch. Like, things that have gone on. And so when we talk about people and planet, how do you live in harmony and how do you live in sync? And that's when you come back to what is sustainable. If laws are basically built to maintain an extractive economy in a lot of ways. And I think, well, we'll keep plugging that book. It's so worth reading. The first 3 chapters of it are looking at the last 10,000 years about what an extractive world looks like. But if you have a nation that's in extreme poverty, eventually they will rise up, rebel, and fight. That will happen. So it's up to a government to make sure that there's a level of well-being and that everyone is working in sync with each other to create the public services that then they stay in power, and all that kind of stuff. So the political side of what is human existence and what is good living and what is the possibility of human beings. And I would boil it down to our ability to find something better. And right now, if you put it through the lens of climate, because I'm an absolute believer, there's a huge problem. You know, you don't have to read another article about it or get more science. We have overstepped our, as I was saying, the planetary boundaries. There is too many people on this planet, and we are just absolutely pillaging it. And we've got to use technology in a way that can enable us to live in sync with to reconnect with ourselves, other people, and the world around us. And I think
Hmm.
I'm optimistic of that, because there are different ways of doing things. And I think entrepreneurs are the best people at working out what they are, and that those changes that come from the fringes, we want them to arrive at Blue Earth. And when we see that that is creating well-being for everyone forever, as a network, we want to get behind those things and push it forward. And in doing so, make the climate movement, give it real impetus. Yes, there's a problem, and here's a solution. And that to me has got way more purpose and ambition than any tech summit. It's sort of protect the actual thing that we all depend on the most.
Yeah. Um, I am intrigued to take a real segue. You have had you've had quite a few chapters in your life. You ran an outdoor adventure company. You run events, but that's not what you do. But in terms of the things that have affected you and your passion for this, how much have you having children affected that, if at all? Did it make your passion for what you do now stronger?
Yeah, I think children are a good way of being reflective. I've got kids that are now sort of going into their final schools. You know, my eldest is 14 and or 13, about to be 14. He dropped him off at his next school this morning, and you're like, God, it doesn't feel like that long ago that I did that. You know, and so then I think it can enable you. It can give you a sense of purpose. You know, I think when we talk about sort of levels of depression in the world and levels of happiness, people that have purpose and have real sort of purpose in their lives are normally, you know, find a bit more happiness and can level through the ups and many downs that there are in life. So I think children are a good focus of that, and they're a sense of responsibility, they're a sense of joy. Um, and then in terms of, if your question is around, am I running Blue Earth to create a better world for my children? Um, I think I've heard that phrase so much within the climate movement that I'm almost bored to death of it. I probably do. Of course, I want my kids and my grandchildren to live in a better world, and I want them to grow up with nature around them and all those sort of things. Um, but I actually think that mindset is just so obvious. And so really, what do I think children has done? It's certainly, I think on a personal level, it makes you more complete in yourself. But then I
Hmm.
also think that those people that don't have children from an entrepreneurial background have got absolute focus. You know, the best work I do is when I'm away, actually. And I think a lot of people that say, "Oh, I'm working from home," I think there's one. You know, I think the days of bringing your kids onto Zoom calls, I think, have thankfully gone. But you know, sometimes work and home, they're quite countering, actually. You know, people without kids are able to really radically focus. I can, sort of. So I don't know if I've answered your question there, but the kids are great.
Do you find that it sharpens your mind as to what you do want to spend time on? Because I've heard, for example, Ben Francis, the founder of Gymshark, said that after he had kids, he stopped doing a lot of the unessential stuff around the edges, the 80 of the 80/20, and
Yeah.
started much more focusing on the 20% that really matters. Have you found that quite clarifying? And what have been those things, if so?
Well, I think to be sort of honest or soppy about it, kids can bring you a huge amount of joy, and they are what matter most in life. And I think if you're starting your own business and you're running and you're inventing, so no one asked us to invent Blue Earth. We just believed it should exist, and then we tell everyone, from the early stages, that you should be a part of it. And so you've got to create that demand, and when that demand doesn't always come in the early days, we can feel a bit rejecting. You can feel like, oh, I thought you were going to back our platform. I thought you were going to sponsor. I thought you were going to buy a ticket. And why haven't you? And then you can take that all to heart. I think a lot of founders are extroverts, and they take everything to heart in the end. And you've got to sort of learn to not do it. And I think kids can, you can have a bad day at work, and you can go home and you can ask your kids about their world, and you go, actually, do you know what? Aren't I lucky? Aren't I lucky? I've got healthy children. I've got a solid family base. So many people don't have that scenario, or would love that scenario. It can give you a sense of gratitude about what actually matters, because that sponsor that didn't sponsor this year, they'll be back next year. And actually, you've just got to use it as a motivational force to say, well, we'll be better off without you. I think if to take that down a different path, so kids can be a great tonic to what really matters. But in terms of, if it's sort of advice around sort of entrepreneurial journeys, I think there's a really good book out in the market called Anti-Fragile.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's by a guy called Nassim Taleb. And it basically,
Oh,
he wrote Black Swan, and talking about sort of like, shocks in the system. But it's about things that when bad things happen, how do they make you stronger? And I think I've understood the direction of your question around the role of children, but in terms of that entrepreneurial sort of resilient mindset, like, things happen that are out of our control, and how do you use the bad to strengthen you for good? And I think there's that the entrepreneurial route, it is not for everyone. There are a lot of people that would just say, I don't like that whole risk reward thing. I don't like putting my head above the parapet, because it's constant fail, really. Entrepreneurialism. It's test, learn, which is the bit that I left out there is test, fail, learn. And actually, you've got to be quite thick-skinned to it, because it's very, very few things are an overnight success, and most entrepreneurs, it's not their first rodeo, I think. And you've just got to see it as a rodeo, and just hang on in there, and hope that all those bucks and trends make you stronger, which inevitably they do.
Yeah, it's not an overnight success, but Blue Earth has grown every year that you've done it. Why do you think it has?
I think it's because we're honest on who we are and what we're trying to do.
Do you not think enough people are honest?
Yeah, I think people get tied up in their own marketing a lot of the time. I definitely think there's this world of what I call preference falsification, where you say one thing but you think something totally different. And I think the conference space is absolutely full of that, where people get on stage and they know what they should say, so they do say it, and when they come off stage, they think of something totally different. And I think that world exists in the conference world, where it's very easy to go to a climate conference, which I would love people not to describe Blue Earth as a climate conference. So I probably should stop describing it myself as a climate conference, even though I think you'll get the gist of why I'm saying that. But I think you can go to a typical climate conference knowing that your peers and your audience are in the audience, and you can say the right thing. It doesn't mean that with no real callback on it and no real expectation to do anything about it. And I actually think to get to the right answer, you've got to be prepared to say the wrong thing. And I don't think in this day and age people are prepared to say the wrong thing for fear of getting cancelled. And I think if you can create a safe space with a microphone, which is even harder, for people to actually say what they think, you'd be amazed how many people will vote for it. And actually, as I move into that chat, look at that, what's going on in global politics. How on earth are these nutters getting into power? And now we're waking up to radio stations that are saying we've got our own version and he might get into power. And you're like, and you think, what is the truth in what they're doing? They're just saying what they think. And that's not necessarily to think that they're right. I think that to be an optimist, there could be a bit of a reset in terms of just be honest, be prepared to say the wrong thing and get debated on it. We live here in London in a very free world. We can say and do nearly anything we like. We should revel in that. And I think there is a bit too much preference falsification where people are saying one thing and doing something totally different. So I think we've really begun to encourage people at Blue Earth to get on stage and be a bit more reckless, be a bit more, be a bit more maverick, be a bit more, be a bit more real, and out of that, people will come with you, because from a marketing perspective, the climate's a marketing dream, and that's where a lot of people flooded into it. If you want to build a following, start a campaign. Well, what is more of a worthy campaign to protect all life on Earth and find well-being for everyone forever? That's the campaign we're on. So I'm not hugely surprised that it's got the following that it's got, but I think we'll only maintain that if we keep being refreshing, keep saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, and being open about it, because there's nothing worse than meeting someone from the climate space that's judging you at hello whilst telling you how many years they worked in climate and have you read their latest book, because it doesn't bring people with you. And that, I think, to the start of your point, was why is the climate movement broken? It's because it's judged too many people at the door.
I wonder whether the brashness and the just say whatever the fuck is on your mind is something that the right and the populism has done very, very well. And even if someone completely disagrees with what they're saying, how they're saying it, and the directness with which they're saying it is what's attracting them. And it seems like you're kind of like, that's what we need a bit more of, when you said, let's have a bit more recklessness on our stage and like say what we actually think, and who cares if we, fuck it up.
Well, yeah, but for an example, why do banks back oil companies? Own it. Because they're legally required to make a return on investment for their shareholders and their funds that invest in them. And if they don't do that, they're breaking their own laws, and I'm not in the finance space, or the actual law. It's that a pension fund, as an example, you're playing with people's, that's such an important pot of money in our system. If pension funds do so, the only thing that banks should be doing is investing that in safe assets. Now, what a shame that it just so happens to end up in fossil fuel projects. I'm absolutely dead against that, but I'm realistic to why that happens. And so the challenge that the Blue Earth movement hugely accept and are really sort of motivated by is come up with better asset classes. Let's we're talking a lot about sort of carbon capture, carbon removal, and how we can get institutional money into those spaces and bring the insurance companies into that. And then you'll suddenly get the climate space that they'll say, oh, no, need to stop all that. No, we're not doing any carbon removal because that's greenwashing. We shouldn't be emitting the carbon in the first place. But that's unrealistic. If we take global climate temperatures as a bath of hot water, to use the analogy, that's overflowing, there's two things you can do. You can turn the tap off and you can take the plug out. And our suggestion is do both. Yet the climate world will spend ages debating whether or not it's a good idea to pull the plug out. Well, of course, it's a good idea to take the plug out. We need to remove carbon from the world because that is causing temperature rises at a catastrophic level. We were aiming at 1.5. We're now gone 2.7, and probably we're going to exceed 3. So the science is in on that. We pull the plug out and then we turn the tap off, but we're not going to turn the tap off to flying. Like, the world isn't going to stop flying. That's like back to the worlds of degrowth. We're not going to stop flying. We just got to fly better. we've got to come up with different ways of powering human mobilization around the world. And until we come up with something better than fossil fuels, um, they are going to be powered by fossil fuels. And so that's sort of the mindset around transform the way the world works, that as entrepreneurs and problem solvers, we get really motivated by.
Yeah. Yeah, it is motivating. Um, in terms of practical things that someone can kind of come away from this conversation and do if they want to get involved or they want to learn more about what you've said, the book Stella seems like it's a surefire one. But are there other kinds of people that they should look into, or podcasts, or books? I'm sure maybe coming along to a summit
Yeah, well,
at some
I
point
think a lot.
soon.
So we don't pay any of our speakers to come. They all come with an agenda and a mission, and hopefully they align with our mission, which is a transformative one to the way the world works. And a lot of them have written books, and I've learned so much by being part of Blue Earth. You know, I almost cringe when I look back at how much I didn't know at the beginning of the Blue Earth journey. But really, my whole motivation in it is to be part of what comes next, because well-being for everyone forever, that's got to be what comes next. Because I can't even unpick that, because but live. What's the opposite of well-being for everyone forever? It's the opposite of well-being for a few people for not very long. Like, obviously for everyone forever will outcompete um, the alternative. And it is an alternative. We will run out of natural resources if we continue to drag them out of the world at the force that we are. And so the amount you can learn by being open-minded is amazing. And I think it's okay to not have all the answers. And I think the most dangerous people you meet are the people that know it all. Because
Mm.
if the climate world could solve the world's problems on their own, they already would have. And I think most of them are humble enough and smart enough that when you point that out to them, they go, I get it. That's why Blue Earth needs to exist. We need to open the doors. We need new ideas. We need new investment. And we need to start framing this tipping point as an opportunity, which it 100% is. If you change the way we eat, the way we build cities, the way we move around cities, the way, you know, AI is going to create autonomous vehicles. I think in our lifetime, um, the ownership of a car will go. I think there'll just be a car park of, like Lime bikes, but cars that you get in that can do 1 million miles, that you don't even need to drive, and you just tell it, like your phone, take me there, and off you go. And the reason that would take off is because it costs less than what owning a car does today. And I think if the question is, what can you learn? You can learn a huge amount by admitting that you don't know everything. And I think that is where we really want to have that sort of be part of the movement that says, I'm open to new ideas. We've got all kinds of different sectors in, where there's energy meets finance, meets built environment, meets rural, meets food, meets agriculture, all different things. And none of them know as much as the person sitting next to them, because everyone's an expert in something, but no one knows it all. And I think you've got to have some binding mission, which is the natural world. Like, that is ingrained in us as early stage humans, that we are part of the natural world. We can't see it as this world that we just hammer people and planet and expect to live happily ever after. And I think that can be a binding motivation. But what really motivates people is what is better. And to do that, you've got to inspire people. You can't scare people. And normally people are inspired to protect what they love, and they run away from what they hate. And that's where the energy of Blue Earth comes from. And it's it's quite a movement. It's quite a journey, and it's finding some incredible people, and they're doing they're doing a lot of amazing things.
It looks like you got a hell of a lineup for the next one. So yeah, really exciting. Um, where can people find out more and maybe connect with you after this?
So we are, blueearthsummit.com is talking about the summit that is coming up in London, 15th to the 17th of October. Beyond that, we have a membership for entrepreneurs that are looking for funding. That's our ventures. We show up at global events, and we often run these different things. So find us online on our website. LinkedIn, we're horribly active on LinkedIn. Love it or hate it, we are on it.
Me too. Horribly active.
And if you're coming to Blue Earth with a solution, right or wrong, you're going to be welcomed into the tribe. And it does feel like a tribe, and it's now got enough years behind it where, we've got people that have been to every single one, and they are, friends of the show really. And it's meant to be an enabler, and it's thankfully proving itself to be exactly that.
Nice. Thank you very much, Will. I've really enjoyed this.
Oh, well, thanks, Rob, and best of luck with your podcast, and thanks for having me on.
Cheers. Toodaloo.
Bye.